Okay, shall we start? Okay. So, in my introductory talk to my contributions to Compmusic, I will basically talk about the temporal structure in music. I avoided the term rhythm a little bit for some reasons that will become more clear throughout the talk. It's a talk which is, the first part is some kind of extended business card. So it's a bit, I will tell what I did in my PhD and in my postdocs before, or what I do right now. And I want to give an overview of what I think might be the related things which might base on my work until now and which might contribute to Compmusic. So to each of these chapters, I will only, to these 4 chapters, I will only give a very short overview. This is kind of the framework I thought about for my PhD, which was basically finding similarities in audio of traditional forms of music. So I thought about it should have a rhythm component and a melody component connected somehow and synchronized by beat tracking. And well, my PhD, it figured out that, I started with the rhythm thing, and it took almost all the length of my PhD. So I ended up there somewhere, but I did also something down here, a little bit with the help and methods I took from Badisch. So regarding onset detection, as I said, I will only give a very short overview of what happened there. If you want, I have in each of these chapters, I have in the talk, there are the related publications, so you can have a look if you like. So the first step to rhythm processing, as I thought it, would be an onset detection. So creating some kind of OSS, which stands for an onset strength signal, which is a signal which I like to compute from audio, which is supposed to have big values in the ideal case where a note starts. So the contributions here in onset detections were basically that we, in a cooperation, in a 3-month visit in Izmir at Badisch former institute, we compiled quite a large data set of onset annotated data. And what we did there is combining or presenting first novel onset detection functions based on phase characteristics, the group delay, and also on the F0 characteristics. And possibly the most important thing there was that combining a magnitude approach, so spectral flux-based approach, which is the most common one maybe, with phase-based approaches and F0-based approaches led to superior and robust results on all types of instruments. There's a small figure here, or 2 small figures here, which basically show some kind of performance curves. So the more far up such a curve gets up to the upper right corner, the better it is. And this line here and this line here is for the combination of the signal aspects of phase, magnitude, and F0. And as you can see, even for instruments which have a strong energy component at its onsets, which can be tracked quite nicely with spectral flux, even there's a very small improvement. But for example here, in this case, on both strings instruments, we can see that the F0 actually was the best single component. So you have the problem of flexibly combining and deciding when to use what. So just using them all together significantly improved and led to quite a robust onset detection, which, well, we will see later that I think that this kind of combination is quite an important result and should lead to a thinking of rhythm processing which is not based only on energy or phase characteristics, but keeps in mind also melody progressions. It was also interesting to see, related to the contrast between Western and Turkish music, that actually onset detection in Turkish instruments was quite a more difficult task due to the rich ornamentations. I hope it will work now. I don't know. The volume, do you?
I think it's kind of very big.
Let's see, I hope. So as you can imagine, this is quite difficult to onset annotate due to all the ornamentations you have in the playing. While this, this piano example is still quite a complex one, but it was more easy to annotate. Where I have to say that, for example, chords have been annotated as one onset. So there's apparently at this level already there's a significant difference. So, okay, another step was the rhythm similarity, which was taking the results from these onset detection, or not detection, but from these taking the onset strength signal and using them to describe the rhythmic content in the signal. There, already in my PhD, there was quite a lot of work, so it's impossible now to get into details, but just to give a basic overview. So I used these onset strength signals to describe the rhythmic properties of a sample. And one important finding then, or one basic idea in the PhD, was usage of a not novel transform, but novel at least in this context, the scale transform, to make a description robust to tempo changes. The idea is quite simple. You take this OSS, compute an autocorrelation, and then you throw it simply inside this transform, which has the nice property, if you put something inside, or if you put two signals and one signal is the scaled version of the other version, the output will be the same in magnitude. So autocorrelations, if you consider that one piece is played at one tempo and then a little bit faster, the autocorrelation will be ideally simply scaled. So using this transform and keeping its magnitude would enable one to compare two pieces in terms of rhythm by completely forgetting about tempo. After the PhD, during my work in Vienna, it figured out that this is not necessarily desirable for all forms of music. In Ottoman music, this is quite nice because all these usul we had a short look at can differ very widely in terms of tempo, but they still remain the same usul, and we want to be able to identify them. But if you think, for example, about hip-hop music, if you have a hip-hop beat at 90 BPM and you play it at 130 BPM, then it will not be considered hip-hop anymore. So in popular music, tempo is quite an important factor. So we developed, or basically we showed that there are two different descriptions which should be used dependent on the musical context you're actually working on. This becomes quite clear here. This is a tempo distribution from the ballroom data set, so Western ballroom dances. You see that the overlap in tempo is quite small, so you can use, for example, the tempo in order to discriminate between or differentiate between different forms of dances or rhythmic patterns. While this is for the Turkish collection I have, and you see that it's more, okay, it's just a huge amount of distributions where tempo does not say too much about to which class a piece belongs. Okay, yep, so I think that's on rhythm. Again, summing up what I just said about the tempo robustness. I did some work on feature selection based on mutual information. We used various classification approaches to show that this is in general valid on several data sets. And an interesting thing we did recently is using on a larger collection of data sets, we did some statistical tests on general processing parameters which regard, for example, the window length you want to consider in order to describe rhythm. And we showed which change of parameter is actually does lead to any significant changes and which not. So, for example, if you use any kind of FFT or autocorrelation based processing, we showed that any window length longer than 8 seconds is not going to lead to any improvement, and above that it's going to go down significantly and things like that. Beat tracking was not so much part of my PhD, but is now recently most important part of my work in INESC Porto. It served as the synchronizing part in the concept for my PhD. And what happened there, or what is happening actually right now, is that we try to get beat annotated data sets with a focus on difficult data. So it's we try to identify automatically, without the existence of ground truth, as I say down here. We try to estimate the difficulty of a piece, not perceptually, but for the state of the art in beat tracking. So if we don't have, we want to improve the state of the art in beat tracking, and we want to get an idea of what's the problem, we try to identify the pieces which actually have some properties which make state-of-the-art fail in order to understand about the signal properties. So that's kind of the philosophy of this research. Already during the PhD, I showed that a phase-based approach can improve beat tracking in traditional forms of music. I have a small example here where beat tracking actually does not perform too bad, but the beat tracking is done here just with beat root on a traditional piece of Cretan music. And at first, I can say the beginning is nice. It's in a double tempo, but it's nice. But then you will see where problems appear, and okay, I will just play it and you. Aman, aman, yeah. So basically, a lot of things there is about syncopation, which makes approaches fail, which is documented in work from musicology that many of these pieces have a strong amount of syncopation. And of course, if a big part of the energy suddenly falls on the in-between, then beat trackers stumble around a little bit and then it's over. And that's what actually happens. All state-of-the-art approaches I tested on Cretan music completely fail. Even though all Cretan music is completely 2/4 in terms of rhythm, so it's even. You have a very continuous accompaniment. There's nothing too bad about it, but the melodic structure and the intonation apparently just makes it fail. So using phase for computing these onset strength signals is a factor which makes it possible within the same beat tracking framework, basically. Okay, for the last page of the business card, that's the small part which throughout the PhD I had all the time when I had 2 days of free time, or as Kemal Bey said, I had one Sunday free to develop something else. I did some work on melody, and by the end of the PhD I realized that I can integrate it into the PhD, and I had this small publication on that. So it's basically doing a beat tracking. Okay, there's some part I should have deleted that. I had a baseline system based on chroma features, which is the system by Dan Ellis for cover song detection, and I compared my system with that system. So basically I do a beat tracking, but then I don't compute chroma features, but I use a F0 estimation algorithm by Ansi Klapuri, which estimates F0 from polyphonic signals. So mainly the predominant F0. And then I compute the melody histograms which Barish explained us about. So basically I tried to do what Barish did on monophonic signals. I just tried what happens on polyphonic. And the interesting thing is that it worked astonishingly well on this music, at least. So I was able basically to spot occurrences of some melodic pattern in a polyphonic mixture. Maybe it's easiest if I give you this result. For example, I have a query and I have a sample played by a different player where some musicologists said, here at this part there's a pattern, a melodic pattern, which is equal to this query pattern, but a different player, different recording. And I try with this method to spot the occurrences, and you can see here that at these two highest peaks, for example, are both occurrences of the query pattern in the sample. I can just play you the query maybe 1 or 2 times, and then you can listen to a part of the sample and you can try if you can spot it. Maybe once again. Okay, and this is the sample where it is somewhere hidden. Okay, by listening to it, you can spot it, but the question was, does such a simple approach work somehow? And indeed, it is at least it is surely good enough to help as a guide in a piece where you don't know what's actually happening, which has not been transcribed. You can at least, instead of listening to the whole piece, you can listen to some parts of it. You can easily focus on some things which might be interesting for you because they have the same content. So, yeah. Okay, so let's go now back to the future. Some drawbacks. As you saw from the structure, rhythm and melodic content are processed widely independently. So I think, and also some reports from psychoacoustics show that melody, the structure of a melody clearly influences the perception of rhythm. So there should be some earlier fusion. These things influence each other. And also onsets, beats, and rhythmic things are, in this work I showed you, they are separate blocks. But if you imagine you have some idea about the beat, you can say where onsets are more likely. Or if you have some knowledge about the length of a rhythmic cycle, I mean, all these things can be integrated into a larger network possibly. And no information from musical score was included until now. In beat tracking, apparently we have a problem that okay, all state-of-the-art approaches reach some kind of glass ceiling, and the question is why? Just changing the characteristic of the input signal, I mean, taking phase instead of energy, will not change something about the basic concept in beat tracking. So there should be something more substantial to do. Yeah, and this is point 5. It's the most experimental part of the experiment. The description I showed you right now is working somewhere in a transform domain, but as I will show in a small example later, sequential order information is lost. So we might be interested in cases where we can keep the sequential order, but we might have cases where we can keep them, and we might have cases where we are forced to throw them away. But we still want to compare these two cases. So this is a messy thing. The general strategy is that I think the framework I showed you above should be changed. And maybe should look somehow like that. This is actually the framework I proposed for Marie Curie project, which will hopefully be accepted. But anyway, it forms some kind of the framework I think about to base the work upon. And it's basically it contains modeling all these influences between onset positions and the positions of beats, but also of motives and of rhythm groups, these influences, but in each of these things also the influences between melodic aspects and temporal aspects. So as far as I can judge it, and as far as I saw from literature and from the work from Thailand Jamgil, this can be solved in a Bayesian framework. The experimental part about is that I don't know too much about Bayesian techniques, but this will be an interesting learning process for me. The next thing which I think in Compmusic should be very elementary, at least for our work in the Turkish group, is that, okay, you have a piece of music and you listen to it, but in many pieces in which we have difficulties in understanding temporal structure, we actually have a score. In beat tracking, when you think about beat tracking, where is beat tracking difficult? Okay, classical music, jazz, okay, in Ottoman music it will be difficult. So in many cases, it's music which is complex in its composition, but because it's complex in its composition, usually, I mean, when you want to understand, really understand about a piece of classical music, it's very helpful to take the score and to see it. It's helpful in terms of understanding the motives, it's helpful in terms of understanding the beat, if you want to call it a beat. So I think an important step is having data sets of actual recordings that are aligned to a score, so that we can understand about timing and all these issues, starting from the onset, going to the structure of the composition, that we can take this structure I show here and also including at each stage information we can obtain from a score. Research questions related to that is, for example, the ornamentations. In this way, we can investigate also the relation between phenomenal accents, which means the accents we perceive, which also include all these ornamentations and whatever might be played or sung in a piece, and the actual note onset, which we see in a piece, in the score. Timing issues are also very interesting. Nobody looked at timing, for example, in Ottoman music, but still timing issues are very interesting still, for example, in Romantic music, where my former colleagues in Vienna did some work, where you can see, for example, a tempo curve from two interpretations of Chopin, where you see, okay, throughout the piece there are the structure of the piece also forms some kind of structures in the tempo development. I mean, this is very interesting also for Ottoman music. It will look completely different, I suppose. But a very interesting thing is also zooming in here and looking at the regularity of the actual beat, which I will give you some examples later. Another question is also, we have a rhythmic structure which is given by the sol, and how strong is it actually emphasized in the composition by the positions of the notes, and how strong is this pertained? How is it? How strong is this still existent in the actual interpretation, or maybe it's even stronger? Maybe the phenomenal accents, the way people use ornamentations to even stress this, who knows? Yeah, and of course what I said, a kind of hybrid processing. So going away a little bit from the dumb audio processing, because we can also imagine that, okay, we have a big database of recordings, but for many of these recordings, at least in Ottoman music, in Indian music, it will be much more difficult. But at least for this music, but also for classical music, for Western classical music, we can easily hypothesize that we have the score available, so we can do something with it. Yeah, and an example from score following. I don't know how much time do I have. I have many examples left, but it's like.
Theoretically 20 minutes.
I have 20
minutes left.
That's okay. Because this example will be a little bit more messy to set up. Do I have it here? Let me see. I think it's this one. Yeah. So I have to say that this example is a bit unfair, because I used a score follower developed at OFI for piano music. So this score follower basically it's based on onset detection based on energy. So it says, okay, there's an onset, and okay, I see an onset, So I'm here, I see the second onset, I'm here, I see the third onset, so I'm here, and so on. And okay, what will happen in Turkish music with all its ornamentations and some instruments playing in parallel, you will see what happens. That's actually why I asked you about the score following you have here, which might be more suitable for music like that already. So I have to say, the score follow has some graphical problems, so it does not jump properly to the next row. So as soon as it ends at the first row, it jumps back to the beginning again. Just imagine it went to the second line. I'm sorry about that, but so now I have to manually synchronize the playback from this player and that, because I was not able to capture the audio at the same time. I said it's a messy demonstration. So let's see. I prepare here. No, I'm sorry. Again. You might notice it's gone. So we are here and he is already here. So he is so far away from everything. So it didn't work at all. Okay, this will be the next thing we are listening to. Okay, so score following, it's also going to be an interesting application to make score following in general more robust. Because this is a score follow which works for romantic piano music. We have a score follow which works for solo violin. Maybe we might find a score follow which works nicely for a flute, but it's like maybe we can make something more general in some way. So, well, about this beat tracking thing, just a short overview. What causes the state of the art to fail? Some things we found now, which are kind of obvious, is a very slow tempo, kills most of the state of the art approaches. Expressive timing, which I mean that the beat is not continuous, but suddenly the tempo slows down a bit, it goes up a bit, not only in a large scale, but very suddenly. And the lack of transient sounds, so maybe only violins. So I will give you an example which has all these nice things together. As I said, it's quite helpful to look at the score. So here you are. Try to do the beat tracking. Okay, I don't know, somebody said something about the well-formedness of meter in Western music, which is, okay, you have this, okay, beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and 4. This is well-formed. But Mozart was, maybe he put this table here and it was a bit longer there. So, well, and maybe this theory was developed exactly for that music, but even in that music there's a problem. So let's think about Turkish music in Compmusic. Other things are, for example, loud singing voice, just somehow parallel to the example from Cretan music, where you had high energy on a syncopation or whatever if you have singing voice. Nice examples in our data set are Edith Piaf singing a strong vibrato somewhere in a frequency which is related to rhythm or not, and beat tracking is over. So you have a low accompaniment and a high and a singing voice with much energy and a strong vibrato, and it's over. It's done. And syncopation, of course. So related to that, okay, this well-formedness, there's also the thinking that there's a grouping structure and a meter structure in Western tonal music. So we have a motive, several motives make a theme, and so on and so on. And there's a meter structure, so we have the 16th note, we have the beat, we have the measure, and they somehow, there's the one, there's the other one, they come close to each other, they do something with each other, but they are separate. As we saw a little bit already in Kemal Bey's presentation, in Turkish music we have these strange animals here, which give us the temporal structure in Ottoman music. So this is basically, it describes the meter, but this is a very typical composition in instrumental music in Ottoman music. It's a peshrev, and this is just the first Han and the first set from this peshrev. So you see 4 lines. This is the usul once, and this is the usul in the second time. And perceptually you can say that the notes, the onsets, are strongly related to what is happening here. So there is at least a very strong relation between grouping and meter, or maybe there's not even a separate grouping and meter structure, but I don't know about musicology in Turkey if they say anything about these things. I don't know.
To my knowledge, no.
So
They don't. Well, they consider it as separate things, but it's difficult to say they consider it. They verbalize it in that sense. But do they consider it or do they apply it separately? I don't think they apply it separately.
Mm-hmm.
For example, now I try to learn an instrument, and I try to fit it to these 3 chords or 8 chords, and I think I play in synchronization with that. Though the musician, when he listens to that, he thinks that my accents are not in correct places. So the melody of the accents you put on melody or the length of those should imply the underlying this meter.
Mm.
Totally. So they are like unified, but when they teach it, I doubt they give enough information about their being unique or so.
Mm. So what I think is that at least for comp music we should try to look at them more together. So not doing a meter analysis, but at least a meter analysis which at least considers grouping and thematic grouping and similarities in the melody in general. So I can just try to play this example.
Can I
Yeah.
comment on? Well, I think the results we will get from this work will also raise questions in the musicology domain. They will have to discuss among themselves. So there will be such kind of contribution. You will bring some problems and results.
Yeah, I think in terms of musicology we can only raise questions. Yeah. As we are not musicologists, we should not try to answer them already.
Yeah,
but
in most of the cases, it's as if, I mean, they already know the answer and we are trying to access their knowledge. But in this case, the knowledge is more variegated. In most of the other things, like for example in tuning, the master has an idea about it, and when he sees my results, he immediately says this is right, this is wrong. But I think with this, when a musician sees the result, he will start thinking of the problems. I mean, he will start discussing. He won't reply immediately.
Yeah, but these things may also imply, let's say, elementary changes to how beat tracking is done, actually. For example, by maybe giving up a little bit this well-formedness, making it a bit softer, and also considering grouping things in beat tracking. And so it's not only for the music community, but this is actually what Compmusic, from what I understand, should also be about to help to go beyond what is currently done in beat tracking, for example. Where beat tracking, anyway, the beat tracking is a word which it's sort of a pain for most forms of music. But so I will try. Yesterday evening I practiced this usul. I'm afraid I will fail, but maybe you can understand by listening to the composition. You can try to understand a little bit how it follows the actual usul. Let me just see. Am I right? No, I'm wrong, huh? Standing and trying this, no, it's too hard. I'm sorry, but... So basically these were two cycles of this pattern, which is basically this do... What's happening? Okay. So it's basically this pattern underneath it, which is this doom, doom, tek, doom, tek, tek, doom, tek, 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 doom, doom, ta, hek, tek, tek, and it starts again. So it's two times this rhythm thing is beneath, somewhere hidden in this composition. But in which way it is expressed in the composition itself and in the interpretation, actually, it's relatively an open question. And I think investigating this can also imply interesting things for processing other forms of music. And as I said, okay, the hypothesis might be also that well-formedness of meter does not hold even for Western classical music, as we heard in the interpretation of a quite well-formed looking piece by Mozart. So the notion of steady beats appears to be an obstacle in most forms of music that we cannot track. So we should maybe use intelligent and nice signal processing methods. Adaptive methods, where with adaptive I mean that maybe we should use transforms that use window lengths and forms which are adapted to the signal characteristics, and combine them with probabilistic models which include something like the beat not being steady but allowing for some deviations. Okay, this might allow us to track these things. And we should, it will also enable us to actually include grouping into this tracking process. So, one final slide. There are some questions which I spontaneously found interesting in the scope of Turkish music. If you follow a score, very often you encounter, as a Western musician or a Western European citizen and used to Western music, you find many points where you'd say, oh, there's a strong syncopation. But if you say if you tell this to a Turkish musician, the word syncopation doesn't make any sense. Maybe. So what is syncopation and what's happening there? I mean, is there, what role does it play in Turkish music? And finally, this thing which I will not even try to explain exactly what is happening here, but imagine, okay, you have two kinds of rhythm descriptions. The one is the one I also did in my PhD. You have something like this. You have periodicities. Let's say here would be something like 120 BPM, 240 BPM, and you have high amplitudes, low amplitudes in different frequency bands. So you can use this for your rhythm description. The nice thing is that you can do that without performing any beat tracking, so you can do it for any kind of signal. The bad thing is you lose information, because when you use the input signal as, for example, the autocorrelation function or whatever, not the autocorrelation function, but the onset strength signal, and you transform it, in order to compare it, you use the magnitude, so the phase is gone. So it's not a complete representation of what you actually had. You lost something. A representation like this, which is here an example by Whiteley and Gemgill, but there are many other approaches like that. It's like, okay, you describe your rhythm in time by certain accents. The problem is, if you have an audio signal, in order to do so, in order to compare audio signals, then you need a reliable beat tracking. And this, okay, as you saw, for many signals, this might be a problem. So you might end up with things you can nicely describe here reliably, but you will have also things where maybe this is the better choice. And maybe, or not maybe, but this will all be a description of music, of rhythmic content in music. And the question is, if you can only do this and you have another piece for which you could do that, how can you compare them? So it would be nice to have this description, but to find a mapping towards there, which does not work for using, for example, this transformation which has been used inside here, because it uses only the magnitude. But fortunately, right now in the cooperation with my friends in Vienna, we have available a transformation which could obtain such a thing as a complex. The same thing here in complex, so you could still use the magnitude, but you can maintain also the complete information. So there might be ways then to map these two on each other more easily and to compare them. But this is very, risky, but we will see. Okay, I think that's it. If there, yeah.
I kind of feel like we can actually find very nice cross-cultural stuff with Indian music
Yes.
in terms of instrumental, and also very prominent distinct like differences too. So I think it will be nice if we can find like stuff.
In general, it's on all terms. It's in terms of rhythm, but in terms also of makam and melody and tonal structure. Yes, this is interesting in terms of comparing the music, but also in terms of sharing tools. So.
Yeah.